Good afternoon, everyone. I know the session right before lunch, but we had a tea break shortly, but nevertheless, I'll try to move it along as quickly as possible. When I got to the event here, I just realized that I'm a surgeon going to be speaking to a bunch of young techies and doyens of the field. I think the only common intersection that we can speak of would probably be at the impact and the business side of things. And I'll try to keep my talk focused on that aspect of the impact that we're currently doing. Great, sorry. Okay, so usually when I start my talk, I generally give people a background on what virtual reality is, what XR is, what MR is. I feel like we can skim over that part in great, but because I've had questions with people confusing what virtual is and what virtual reality is, I feel this audience does not need that kind of backbone. But nevertheless, I think what is very fundamentally for us to be understood is virtual reality is and will always be the best training modality. Augmented reality is something which is going to be creating an impact in real-time clinical utilization, where you can see the patient, you can see details, and it can add to those aspects. And now we are going to be essentially dealing with an entire spectrum, which is called XR, or extended reality, where the entire hardware segment, all headsets are now, or all infrastructure is actually now being capable of supporting AR, VR, and mixed reality. So now with that out of the way, I would probably like to go into why virtual reality is now being accepted in the medical field for training. Because this is something which has been mooted to us for a very long time, but for whatever reason, we've been very slow in adopting it. The first and foremost, I would say, as a advantage is the standardization of training. And with such huge numbers of doctors that we are churning out in current days, we see that doctors trained in different parts of the country and different institutions have very different standards. And this kind of software can actually stabilize or standardize the entirety of what we train the students on. The next one is when we have more and more students coming out of each institution. I'm sure if you have gone to any medical institution, you would see a pack of hungry students looking for a patient on whom they can learn. And I know that a lot of you may have experienced being on the receiving end of that. And that's not going to get any better because over the last 4 years, we have increased the student intake by roughly around 70%. We were at 45,000 doctors coming out of the system every year. Now it's at 75. The central government is targeting making sure we have around 1.1 lakh doctors being produced every year. So what is their training material? So this is where being able to have repeated practice on virtual reality actually allows them to make sure they're trained and not put so much of a burden on the patients. The next one is resource optimization. When we speak about increase in the training requirements, we have not actually strengthened our system to that extent. And that is where virtual reality can actually optimize not just the amount of training that we do and the cost required to set up the entire training infrastructure, but also the amount of time doctors actually need to spend on training the next cohort. They can actually go back to treating the patients, allowing the software and the infrastructure to take care of the training requirements. The next one is it's most scalable, and that is something which is going to be of global importance. I'm sure being where I am, everyone knows that healthcare is the largest export of the Indian this thing, other than software, that is, sorry. But nevertheless, I think on moving forward, everyone's identifying that the next largest global export from India is going to be the healthcare professional. And this is where having a scalable medium of training, which is accessible across the globe, makes a huge difference. And last is this is something which has been lacking on all our previous training methodologies. The first being the objective assessment and ability to actually quality control the kind of students that we churn out of the system. Virtual reality can actually track and provide independent, impartial assessment of each student's capacity. And I'll take you through how that is possible in the following slides. There was great focus on AI through the I think, all the morning sessions. And now we have how AI can actually tell the student what they're doing well. Real-time feedback was never possible in previous technologies, even in the mannequin-based training where we used to train on dolls. For very simple understanding, it was those life-size dolls which you might see in cloth shops, which a tailor might practice on. We have slightly more sophisticated versions of that, but we used to train on that, and it would still mean a trainer had to actually observe and then tell you what you are doing right, what you are doing wrong. And essentially, every healthcare professional, doctor, nurse, allied health science, picks up anywhere between 50 to 100 skills during their undergraduate days. And we do not have any kind of methodology to actually be able to assess whether they have learned it at any level of competence during their actual training days. So that is where AI is now making a huge role. It can actually provide you real-time feedback. It can also course correct, and it allows you to track cohort-wide patterns in terms of where the students are actually able to perform well and where they're not. At this time, I think I would also like to talk about why I've spoken about all this, because you're going to be seeing some videos and how it has actually created impact. So we train healthcare students, medical, nursing, and allied health sciences on virtual reality training solutions. This caters to the essential skills which are part of their curriculum, right from putting in an IV line to how do you perform an EKG, how do you put in catheters, how do you dress wounds, and the entire gambit of whatever is involved in entry-level patient care. And as a company, we started this back in 2019. I actually started out trying to build a surgical simulator, because that was, again, another area where we haven't had too much of innovation over the last 3 decades. Believe it or not, I trained on pretty much the same technology which my dad trained 3 decades back. And these are things which, as a healthcare fraternity, we are very reluctant on pulling the screen and letting everyone else see how the training actually happens behind closed doors. But now we are at an intersection where a lot of technology is being welcomed in. There's a lot of opportunity for cross-utilization. And at this point, being able to showcase the requirement and where an impact can be made becomes of great importance. And we started out of IIT Incubation Cell back in 2019. Our initial breakthrough got us into the J&J incubator. Long story short, 2022, we realized that there was a greater requirement for grassroots level training at scale rather than very niche solutions. Of course, that's where all the fancy or attractive money is, but the larger money, the bigger impact is always at the grassroots level. And that is something that we've been focusing on for the last few years. Fast forward to today, we currently train roughly around 12,000 students on our platform. We are at 16 institutions, making us one of the largest healthcare training providers on virtual reality. So now I want to showcase a small video and take you through how the training solution actually works. So this is an inexperienced grab and small snippets of how IV cannulation actually happens. The software is delivered through virtual reality labs to the student. So the student is taken through entire segments of the procedure, which means you have very standardized ways of knowing, okay, in each procedure, before the procedure, there is one segment, I will be doing all of this. Then you go through all of your steps in a very guided manner. We are essentially teaching protocols. So we have 2 modes. One is what we call the guided mode. And that makes sure that the student or the trainee does not deviate from what is the platform that has been set. And then you also have your evaluation mode, which is very similar to the sandbox style training, which a lot of providers across the globe actually do. You can go and perform whatever you want. You get some kind of feedback at the end saying, these things you did right, these things you did wrong. But those solutions have often been of use for existing professionals, and which is why it has not been adaptable as a training methodology. So now if you look at, this was a very small glimpse, because I know that in 10 minutes I couldn't showcase an entire procedure, but for those who are interested, we have a few modules which are available to try out, and you can practice maybe saving a life. Then the next question was, when we came to this, when we took this kind of technology to the institutions, we had to also identify what would make them adopt it. That setup actually involved us first experimenting with setting up a very traditional computer science style lab, which is what I saw in school, because after that, in medical colleges, we don't have computer science labs, which was a desktop, and then you connect your tethered headset to it. And we realized that there was a lot of difficulties in how the student or the end user was actually perceiving the experience. And even if you look at a lot of companies which are currently delivering solutions, they tend to go the untethered way because it is less capital intensive and probably easier to propagate at scale. But what happens with that is institutions or the decision makers actually have a lot of holdups. One, safety of the user. Two, lack of control. So if the user or the trainer does not know what is happening for each individual user, they're very reluctant on adopting these kind of technologies. So essentially, we had to cede control to the institutions. We could not do a B2C kind of an solution. We had to still route it through the existing channels of learning, which were going to be the medical institutions. And then we set up virtual reality labs in those institutions. After we started as desktop solutions, we had so many user experience related challenges, right from the headset, the charging cables coiling around students, to students' heights changing every time they stepped in and out of boundaries. And we were not able to run it seamlessly. And it required 5 or 6 members of a development team being there for each session, which could cater to 20 students. Since then, we came up with our own solution in terms of we developed a VR station which could seamlessly deliver an virtual reality experience without requiring assistance from anyone else as it happens. So this, if you look at, is roughly like 1,500 square feet space, 1,200 maybe, where we fit in around 10 to 15 stations. And allow the user to come in, key in their details, have a UV sterilization unit at the top. The headset automatically retracts all the way up after each experience, then comes down once the student puts in their credentials. And of course, we also had to do all the fancy lighting because we wanted the students to feel like they were in like the coolest spot on campus kind of a deal. But nevertheless, the thought behind the madness was also very much a requirement, because institutional buy-in had to happen at that scale, where they thought that this would, one, be a feature which they could showcase to the potential students, to quality checks, to even showcase the kind of features the amenities that they provide to students to have their rankings in their whatever accreditation process taken care of. So these were all areas that you had to touch upon and kind of bundle it into a single solution. And that is kind of how we brought together the entire solution. So then usually when I speak about these kind of solutions, I said, like, we've been hearing about virtual reality based training for a very long time. How come nothing's happened on field? And we are not seeing en masse adoption. And which is, I would say, fairly true. And we've had multiple false dawns with virtual reality as a technology. I think the first study, if you look at, was all the way back in 2001 for some surgical procedure. And since then, we've had a couple of such rises to prominence of the tech. But now, if you see that it required a very Indian brain and Indian team to actually get it pushed into Indian ecosystems. And now we have roughly, at each such lab, we are able to train 500, 600 students annually. And that brings down the cost requirements at scale as well. So we have similar such labs across 4 or 5 institutions, now that's at around 12 institutions across the country. And the other area of focus is the policy level adoption. Because earlier, it was only the private players who were actually focusing on, trying to bring in cutting-edge standards. Now there's a good identification of the requirements and the benefits of these kind of technologies at a policy level. One of Jeeva Raksha Trust is, I would say, it's a RGUHS, the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, is the largest healthcare university in the globe in terms of the numbers that they handle. And their subtrust has actually now taken on board delivering training through virtual reality at scale across the state. The same way the medical colleges have a central body, which is called the Healthcare Sector Skill Council, which sets the norms on how simulation labs have to be delivered across the country. And they have also adopted this, and they're making it part of the future moving forward. So that, I think, probably the last thing I'm going to speak about. I know my light's flashing. That's probably 10, 15 seconds at most, though. We spoke about global, export of healthcare, and I know that a lot of us are familiar with what is happening on point now. In Europe, each country, I know personally of at least 4 or 5 instances and bodies in India which have signed MOUs to deliver anywhere between 2 lakh to 5 lakh healthcare professionals to that each country over the next 5 years. And we have no idea how we are going to do it. They want quality of, a very high quality of standardization for the professionals being absorbed. And that is where this comes in. So we already have a case record where the Netherlands government has absorbed the first 5 pilot-trained healthcare professionals, nurses and allied health technicians. They were trained in a plethora of skills, not just technical. Their vocational skills were all on point. What actually cinched the deal was that they were able to log into a shared training experience from their locality and ensure that the students were actually being trained. Because however much they respect the Indian healthcare professional, at a junior level, the quality of their training is still considered suspect. And this technology is what can actually help bridge that particular gap. And I think the future is abundantly blessed for us in terms of such opportunities. And we are at the right time to actually start taking advantage of those. With that, I'm going to actually wind up my talk and open to any questions, if at all. Thank you so much.